America is known for its endless forests, mountain ranges, and national parks, which attract thousands of tourists every year. However, sometimes these wild and beautiful places seem to open an invisible door behind which people disappear without a trace. Today, we will tell you 3 real stories that took place in the forests and mountains of the northwestern United States and Alaska, and which remain unexplained to this day. August 1973, the forests of Montana; July 1995, the Ruth Glacier in Alaska; and June 1989, Mount Hood National Park in Oregon. Each case is a story of the sudden and inexplicable disappearance of a person literally before the eyes of others without any logical explanation. What really happened? Let's try to figure it out. In the dense forests of Montana, in the heart of the remote Lolo area, the silence of the forest is sometimes broken only by the piercing cry of a hawk or the rustling of wings at night. It was here in August 1973, as if from another world, that a story unfolded that still makes people whisper about the facts and wonder about its true meaning. 35-year-old Daniel Murphy, the keeper of one of the tall wooden fire towers, disappeared from his post so mysteriously that it seemed as if he had stepped through an unknown door that closed behind him. A quarter of an hour after his last radio communication, no one was found in the tower, and the lock on the door remained intact. Rescuers expected to see signs of a struggle or nervous panic, but there was nothing to indicate this. And when it seemed that Daniel might still be nearby, his shirt was found a week later in a marshy area a few miles from the tower, leaving all questions unanswered. Thus, a man who had dedicated his life to protecting the local forests disappeared in the hot August sun, and disappeared so quietly that to this day, no one can understand what really happened. Daniel Murphy was born in a small town on the outskirts of Montana. From childhood, his father taught him to love hunting and fishing, although Daniel himself was not so much interested in shooting as in observing wildlife. He spent hours in the swamps listening to the croaking of frogs and trying to record in a notebook which birds inhabited which groves. Neighbors joked that the boy looked at the forest as a friend, not a resource. At the age of 18, having just graduated from high school, he decided to devote his life to protecting the forest. He started out as a ranger assistant in one of the parks, then moved to the Montana Forest Service, where, thanks to his diligence and reliability, he was promoted to fire tower lookout. In the 1970s, such towers were ubiquitous in forest areas, where people liked to watch for smoke and prevent fires. Daniel loved his job, sitting atop a 65-foot wooden tower, spending hours scanning the green canopy for suspicious clouds of smoke. He was happy to be out in the fresh air all summer instead of in an office. The whole of 1973 was relatively quiet. Not many forest fires, warmer than average weather, and few thunderstorms. In early August, Daniel was assigned to Lolo, one of the most isolated spots, as the main shift, a small observation post perched on a hillside. The locals called it simply Murphy's Tower, although its official name was Lolo Juneau. The work shift usually lasted a week. The watchman brought food, lived in a small room at the top, had a radio for communication, and, in case of an alarm or fire, could quickly report the coordinates. He was comfortable with solitude, accustomed to listening to radio broadcasts, reading books, and recording weather data in his diary. The Lolo Forest Service checked in once a day via radio to make sure everything was okay. According to the official call log, on August 7, 1973, at noon, Daniel conducted a standard session. The situation is normal, no fires observed, clear skies, temperature 82.4 degrees Fahrenheit, light wind. Everything sounded routine. 15 minutes later, when the dispatcher tried to clarify some details via radio, Daniel did not respond. He was called 3 times to no avail. The dispatcher decided that Murphy had probably gone to the bathroom or stepped outside to the observation deck. However, time passed, and by around noon they were still unable to make contact. This alarmed his colleagues, as Daniel was considered disciplined. It was decided to send 2 rangers to check on him. They drove an all-terrain vehicle to the foot of the hill and climbed the trail. Even then, something strange had happened. The door leading to the tower itself was locked with a padlock. Normally, if the watchman leaves, the door should be locked, right? Yes, but then how could he have gotten out? Knowing that the lock could only be opened from the inside, the Rangers were at a loss. They called for backup via their portable radios. Their colleagues broke the lock. Inside, they found the room completely intact with no signs of a struggle. A folding chair, a table, a radio, turned on but silent, and Daniel's personal belongings, an observation log, a map, and some food. However, Murphy himself was nowhere to be found. How did he leave the tower if the lock was still on the door from the inside? There were no notes, no explanation of how he got out. Maybe someone locked him out? That would have caused a commotion or resistance. But everything was quiet inside. An urgent search was organized that same day. The case was suspicious. Logic suggested that if Daniel had gotten into trouble, he could have fallen or slipped. But then where were the tracks on the trail? Why was the tower locked in the first place? There were many questions. The network of trails around the tower was small and could be covered in a couple of hours. Rescuers walked around shouting, "Daniel!" There was no response. Soon, volunteers, county police, and more rangers arrived. After a couple of days, they combed every square inch around the hill, flew in a helicopter, and searched the forest. 0 leads. It was as if the man had vanished into thin air. On the 5th day of the search, something happened that compounded the mystery. 3 or 4 miles from the tower, in a marshy lowland, one of the volunteers stumbled upon a shirt lying on the ground, which he recognized as part of Daniel's uniform. However, there were no bloodstains or tears on the fabric that would indicate a struggle or attack by animals. The shirt itself looked as if it had been taken off by a person and folded. The volunteer said that it was just lying on the damp ground, even though the area had been checked 2 days earlier and nothing had been found. A dog was called in to pick up the scent, but again, to no avail. The dog sniffed around a bit at first, but did not pick up a clear scent trail. This stumped the rescuers. Did this mean that Daniel had walked several miles from the tower, taken off his shirt, and disappeared? Or had someone brought it later? And why? And if Murphy had had a mental breakdown, how had the tower been locked from the inside? And was the lock really on the outside or the inside? The police conducted experiments. Perhaps it was possible to reach through a crack or window and hang a lock, but why? And why were there no other signs? The further the search went, the more it seemed that the case had come to nothing. No body, no evidence. Usually if a person falls from a tower or in a forest, there would be blood, pieces of clothing, animal tracks. A crime? No one saw any suspicious individuals in the area, and the tower is located far from populated areas. All that remained was the feeling that Daniel had somehow been taken away in the blink of an eye. This made the situation seem inexplicable. Clear weather, a man at his post, colleagues hearing him on the radio, and 15 minutes later he was gone, and the door was locked. A week after his disappearance, the authorities admitted that they could not continue the costly operation without any clues. Daniel's family was in shock, unable to understand how this could have happened. A young man experienced in forestry, responsible for safety, who always checked everything carefully. When asked by colleagues, "Did you see or hear anything strange?" someone replied that Murphy had only mentioned in the morning that nature was calm and had not mentioned any strangers. In the years that followed, whenever people talked about disappearances in the woods, Daniel Murphy's story always came up as an example of a mysterious situation. The police later officially closed the case. Missing, no evidence of foul play. Other caretakers began working at the tower, and according to rumors, some of them were sometimes visited by disturbing sensations, as if something was rustling there at night, although there were no animals inside. But these are just local tales. Benjamin Reed was born in Seattle into a family where mountain hiking and climbing were considered almost a ritual for passing on knowledge from older to younger generations. His grandfather, a Korean War veteran, loved to take young Ben on rock climbs and teach him how to use ropes and carabiners. The boy grew up shy, but he blossomed in the mountains, as if he was weary of the city noise and found harmony only where there were no crowds. At university, he studied biology and even considered a career as an ecologist, but his heart continued to lie with the peaks. His friends joked, he lived on the plains, but in his heart he was always above the clouds. By the age of 29, Ben had already accumulated a decent list of climbs in the Cascades and Rocky Mountains, and was a member of a small mountaineering company that occasionally organized expeditions to more serious peaks. That's how in July 1995, he found himself in Denali National Park, one of Alaska's northern wonders, where snow-capped peaks and glaciers attract climbers from all over the world. Benjamin joined a group of 4 people ready to climb Ruth Glacier, a place that, although relatively popular among experienced climbers, is unforgiving of mistakes, sudden weather changes, cracks in the ice, and vast expanses with no structures for miles around. Benjamin and his companions, 2 of whom were longtime climbing friends, plus 1 invited through an alpine club, planned to first reach an altitude of about 13,000 feet, set up camp, and then possibly climb one of the more difficult sections of the Ruth Massif. They completed the first part of the journey successfully. The weather was surprisingly clear, with even a slight thaw during the daytime, if you can call it that, on a glacier near the Arctic Circle. The group moved steadily, with no one complaining of ill health. Benjamin usually walked in a rope team, keeping an eye on his partners to make sure no one slipped on the treacherous ice. According to one of the participants, Michael Ferguson, everyone was in good spirits, joking and discussing how great it would be at the summit. But at an altitude of about 13,000 feet, a few hours before the planned camp, something happened that is now remembered with sadness. The participants described the situation as follows. Benjamin was 3rd in the rope team when he suddenly stopped. The entire chain stopped, as it is impossible to pull on a rope. He was looking off to the side as if mesmerized, Michael said. It seemed like he had noticed something on that deserted section of the glacier where there was nothing. The guide or leader shouted to ask what was happening and if everything was okay. But Benjamin did not answer, only carefully freed himself from the carabiner and without a word began to move away from the group, effectively removing the safety system. Everyone shouted, "Stop! What are you doing?" But there was no response. He didn't run, but stubbornly walked away toward the empty expanse of ice away from the route. No one could understand what he was trying to do. In a matter of seconds, his companions confusedly untied themselves from the group rope, thinking they needed to catch up with him safely. But in that short time, Benjamin managed to cover a good 130 feet without looking back. They saw him walking on the flat ice, not hiding behind any ledges, and suddenly, when everyone quickened their pace to follow him, he disappeared from view. He vanished right before their eyes, without a sound. How was this possible? There were no cracks, no holes, no ledges. And the strangest thing was that when they reached the spot, they couldn't find him ahead of them or to the sides. There were traces in the snow, of course, but they suddenly stopped, as if the line of boot prints reached a point and then stopped. No one could explain how he could have disappeared so instantly when the view on the glacier was open and there were no rocks to hide behind for miles around. The rest of the day and the following night, his companions ran around frantically, calling and searching. The weather remained clear. There were no storms or fog that could have hidden a person. The participants notified the rescue services in Denali by radio, who sent reinforcements in the morning. A helicopter, a group of rangers, and volunteer climbers. An operation was organized within a radius of many miles. It was assumed that if Benjamin had not fallen into a crevasse, and there were simply no crevasses there, then he could be wandering around in a state of shock. But all efforts were in vain. People combed the icy fields, crisscrossing them for a week. The tracks disappeared as if they had been erased, and Ben himself was found neither alive nor dead. His friends were in shock. After all, it had happened right before their eyes. "He just vanished," said Max, one of the climbers. "I saw his profile, and a second later, there was no one there." The police reports dryly stated that the glacier is open terrain. There are no large ledges. No cracks were found where a person could have fallen. Disappearance under unclear circumstances. They questioned his friends. Maybe Ben had a seizure. hallucinations. But he had never shown any signs of mental instability. His mental state was stable, and he was in good health. It seemed like a hopeless case. But 2 years later, in the early summer of 1997, when the climbing season was once again in full swing, news came that shocked everyone who remembered Ben's disappearance. Someone had managed to climb one of the nearby peaks, which had not been officially conquered before, and at the very top found an ice axe stuck vertically into the hard ice. The ice axe bore the initials BR, which Benjamin had carved into his equipment. His friends recognized it. There were scratches on the ice axe indicating that it had been used. However, there were no other items or traces of a camp on the peak. The rangers who arrived had difficulty reaching the summit. Below it were steep, complex walls. Serious climbing equipment was needed to ascend, and in 1995, Ben did not have such a set. He only had basic mountaineering equipment for glacier trekking, but not for extreme routes. A logical question arises: how could Benjamin, if he was still alive, climb an unknown peak and even place an ice axe at the very top? And why didn't he leave a note or call for help? If he died, where is his body? Could someone have brought his ice axe? For what purpose? The police investigation provided no answers. No equipment was found, only the ice axe standing alone. There were no fingerprints, blood, or any signs of a struggle. Rangers, after consulting with many alpine clubs, determined that this peak had indeed not been climbed before 1997. Ben's loved ones believed it was a mystical story. A 2-year hiatus, and then an ice axe appears on the summit. The police formally closed the case with the wording "missing, not found." The opinion spread in alpine circles that Benjamin was taken by the mountains under mysterious circumstances. The official explanation was that he could have gone somewhere, lost his mind, or been involved in a mysterious accident, and his ice axe was either found by someone and placed there, or he himself, in some kind of trance, made an impossible climb. But all these conjectures are not based on facts. In July 1989, when summer was at its peak in the northwestern United States, 23-year-old Caitlyn Andrews set out on a solo trip to Mount Hood National Forest in Oregon. She was a nature lover who was not afraid of challenging trails. According to her family, Caitlyn had long wanted to see the famous peaks and waterfalls of the area, which many spoke of as treasures of northwestern beauty. The girl kept a notebook with plans of where and when to make each climb. That time, she chose the trail leading to Tamanawas Falls. The route is not very difficult, but incredibly picturesque, with a rushing stream breaking through lava deposits. According to some tourists who briefly met Caitlyn at the start of the trail, she was traveling light with a small backpack, smiling and asking for directions to the waterfall. She wanted to make sure she had turned at the fork. It was early morning. The sun was already illuminating the peaks of Mount Hood, but the gorges and trails remained in cool shade. Caitlyn looked cheerful and happy. No one mentioned that she had a companion, and she often went on such mini hikes alone. Around noon, as members of one of the hiking groups later described in their accounts, they were walking toward Tamanawas Falls, enjoying the sound of the water, when they suddenly heard a woman singing. It was a very beautiful melody, something like a folk song, which she sang melodiously, said eyewitnesses. The voice echoed through the gorge, and it was very atmospheric. They decided that someone was just enjoying the moment and quickened their pace, thinking, it will be great to admire the waterfall together. However, just a couple of minutes later, when the group reached the foot of Tamanawas, the source of the singing disappeared. The waterfall roared at full force. The sun was still high in the sky, but the young woman was nowhere to be seen. At first, the tourists decided, well, maybe she's already gone up the trail or hidden under a rock overhang. Where the water crashes against the rocks, a misty haze often appears, and a person can easily disappear from view. Several people spread out, circled the rocks, and looked behind a narrow ledge. No luck. None of them had seen the girl, if it was Caitlyn, leave. The melody stopped abruptly, having sounded quite loud just a minute ago. Looking around, the people found no backpack or conspicuous footprints by the river, even though the ground was slightly damp. "She just vanished, that's all," one of the tourists said later. Later that evening, when the group of tourists returned to the parking lot, they spoke to a ranger mentioning that maybe someone was missing because there was a very strange incident where a girl was singing and then disappeared in a couple of minutes. The Temenov's waterfall area is quite popular, however, and no one reported her missing. For the time being, it seemed like a curiosity, although some people began to worry that she might have fallen into the water. But a couple of hours of searching at the foot of the waterfall yielded nothing. The water was clear, and there were no signs of a fall. The next day, an agitated young man ran up to the ranger. "Caitlyn Andrews' friends called me and said she left yesterday and hasn't come back." It turns out that Caitlyn had a plan: to return to the agreed campsite in the evening so that she could drive on with her friend the next day. But she didn't show up. At that time, cell phones were not yet widespread, so her friends took the traditional route. They arrived at the appointed place, didn't find Caitlyn, and called the ranger. This became the starting point for the search and rescue operation. By the morning of the third day after her disappearance, presumably June 15th, volunteers and park employees began flying over the area in a helicopter and searching the trails on the ground, asking tourists if they had seen the girl. A couple of people recalled seeing a young woman near the waterfall, but their description was vague. This coincided with the time when the singing was heard. The strangest thing awaited the searchers 2 days later. About 3 miles from Caitlyn's supposed camp, she wanted to pitch her tent closer to the trailhead. In a completely different part of the trail, her backpack was found in the bushes. Judging by the documents inside, it undoubtedly belonged to Caitlyn. The backpack contained stationery, a small sketchbook, a wallet with her ID, some food, and a bottle of water. Everything seemed to be in order, not scattered around as if someone had carefully left the backpack there, or Caitlyn herself, for some unknown reason, had taken it off and moved on. It didn't make sense. Why would a traveler abandon a bag with her belongings, including valuable documents? No bloodstains, no tears, just lying on the ground. One of the rangers described the find. The area where the backpack was found had already been searched earlier, but apparently not thoroughly, or had it been planted there later. The searchers were puzzled. The search dog that was brought to the backpack only circled the bushes a few times and lost the trail. Despite all efforts, the entire operation yielded no new leads. No one else saw or heard Caitlyn. Everything in her backpack was untouched, with no signs that she had tried to run away from someone or was preparing to go somewhere. The rangers raised the question, maybe it was an accident? Did she fall into a waterfall? But then why is her backpack in a different place? And why didn't anyone find the body below? Maybe she got lost and took off her backpack. But in clear weather and on an easy trail, that seems unlikely. After a week, the search was called off. Everyone realized that the chances of finding her alive were slim. Neither her body nor any additional clothing, camera, if she had one, or equipment were found. Volunteers combed the area for a couple more days, stumbling upon piles of logs and ledges, but to no avail. Ultimately, the police declared that the disappearance of Caitlyn Andrews remains a mystery. There was no evidence of foul play, no indication that she could have left on her own. As a result, the investigation stalled in early June 1989. "We've exhausted all avenues," the officers said. "No new leads." Caitlyn Andrews remains one of the silent mysteries of Mount Hood, where beautiful nature turns into inexplicable tragedy. Her body was never found, no traces remained, only her backpack a few days later. The family held a symbolic memorial service, hoping that someday the truth would come out. But decades have passed, and the story remains a frightening reminder of how unpredictable nature can be when a person is alone with the mysteries hidden behind the roar of waterfalls and the shadows of the forest. Many years later, the fates of Daniel Murphy, Benjamin Reed, and Caitlyn Andrews remain a mystery. All attempts to find any explanation have been unsuccessful. Perhaps these stories will remain a disturbing reminder of how fragile and mysterious the line between familiar reality and the unknown hidden in the mountains and forests of America can be. If you enjoyed this video and would like to hear more unexplained stories, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts on what might have happened to these people in the comments. Perhaps your version is closest to the truth. Thank you for watching. Take care and travel safely.